welcome to country. Auntie Lynn is a very familiar person at the centre. She's a highly respected local Darug elder, an active member of the AECG and Council's Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Advisory Committee. I have seen her over the many years working with us tirelessly with the local community to increase understanding and awareness of Aboriginal culture and history. She's also collaborated with us on many of our programs and initiating NAIDOC exhibitions, which we love to share here. So Auntie Lynn.
Bajara Malawa, good afternoon. Waramai Ningani Layora Nagu Baru Gumari Gumara. Welcome to all people, and I ask that you please listen to the spirits of this land. I wish to pay my respects to the elders who have gone before us for their passing on of the knowledge of our culture in the form of Dreamtime stories, song, dance and art. We, the Darug born of this land, born of the spirits, have walked this country since the dreaming. Darug territory encompasses both land and sea, from the Hawkesbury to the north to the Kiama, now known as Georges River, to the south, from the Blue Mountains down to the Tasman. Today, you are celebrating trees and all things green. Well, in a way, First Nations did that every day because they gave us life. It has been known how to harvest without raking the earth, how much to take without destroying, how to burn so no damage was done, and when to leave it to replenish. Always thanks was given. I'd just like to give you some words to help you understand about the First Nations people. I am the child of the Dreamtime, part of this land, like the gum tree. I am the river singing softly, chanting our songs on the way to the sea. My spirit is the dust devils, mirages that dance on the plains. I am the snow, the wind and the falling rain. I am part of the rocks and the desert plains, red as the dust that flows in my veins. I am the eagle, crow and snake that glides through the rainforest that clings to the mountainside. I awakened here when the earth was new. There was emu, wombat and kangaroo. No other man of a different hue. I am this land, and this land is me. I am Australian. Dayul Bilu Nan Yun Blan Ganyu Buru Yara always was, is and will be our land. Waramai Didgerai Dangyang Bian Jandeli Bulawul Nangani. Welcome to our land, Darug land, and thank you for walking with me and sharing my dreaming.
Thank you, Auntie Lynn. I also would like to acknowledge that we're on Darug land, and I want to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. So, what an amazing day we're having here today with Jungle Jam and the wonderful action we've had so far, including taking over the streets of Bankstown in our tree parade. But I think we're coming now to the more perhaps focused and conversational part of this of the proceedings. And I think it promises to be just as engaging because we've got an amazing panel in front of us. We're here to join in a conversation about trees, and I think it's about making that very real. We're in a place where we are facing lots of environmental change, and I think it's something that we all take seriously. All the people around us here are here for that purpose. And I think it is this conversation that we're going to have about the integral role of trees in our lives for our well-being and for the whole planet. But it's also about their essential place in Western Sydney in particular, and where Bankstown sits and our place here. Bankstown Arts Centre has a very embedded focus looking at sort of issues of artists working with ecological issues and environmental issues. And I think artists bring that particular lens in a very interesting and perhaps sometimes less didactic, but sometimes we can be. But I think it's about that emotional response that we're evoking in people to understand how we can create change. And we're particularly lucky at this art centre. I think what's making it very real for us is the beautiful stand of fig trees that surround us at the centre that have been here for a very long time. And on a daily basis, I'm really privileged to actually experience the kind of amazing life that it brings to our place, the birds that I'm so witnessing on a daily basis. So I think it's about bringing that conversation and taking it to the next step. So our current exhibition has come about in a partnership with the Tree Veneration Society, and it's called Arboreal Narratives. And this brings that kind of attention to things like the street trees that you pass by and you may not take too much notice of, but it's actually saying, hey, stop and pay attention. And so we're going to continue the conversation today with this great panel led by Costa Georgiadis. Costa, I don't think, needs much introduction, but he is our most famous landscape architect and TV presenter with an all-consuming passion for plants and people, and brings out the best in all of us, taking great pleasure in bringing these things together. He's got a holistic approach about gardening, the soil, and the soul. And what's great about having Costa is he's also our Bankstown Art Centre ambassador, and I think he's really taken on that banner in a very solid way for us, and he's been present for many projects over the years as well. And then at the panel sitting on my left here is Uncle Dean Kelly. Uncle Dean is both a South Coast, New South Wales saltwater Yuin, Yalbanja Durga Gurangi cultural man through his father, and Western New South Wales freshwater stone country cultural Walwan Nyapma. Sorry, I'm not pronouncing this properly. You might have to say the word.
I'll tell you.
Yep, man, through his mother. Uncle Kelly is a member of the Botany Bay Aboriginal community and is also accepted as belonging to the La Perouse Aboriginal community. As a cultural practitioner, his true passion and cultural obligation is dedicated to the protection and preservation of Aboriginal cultural heritage. Louise Fowler-Smith is an eco-artist and writer who has been researching the sacred tree for the past 2 decades and has found the practice of venerating or honoring trees has been able to protect trees in some parts of the world. And Louise is the founding member of the Tree Preservation Society. Mailithi has worked with us in Bankstown Art Centre for many years as well. She came to Australia in 1985 from the Central Highlands of Vietnam and is a local artist. Maili practices mixed media installation, sound and video arts, and her work speaks about the human conditions using symbols to express the common humanity and determination to survive. And last on the panel is Sebastian Pfautsch. Sebastian is an associate professor of urban planning and management at Western Sydney University with a master in forest management and a PhD in tree physiology. In his current research program, he investigates the practicality and effectiveness of interventions that help cooling Western Sydney specifically, and his work features regularly in the media as well. So I think it's going to be a very exciting panel, and I'm going to hand it over to Costa to take over from here. Thank you.
Welcome. Is that on? Hello? Oh, that's on now. Welcome everyone to the Bankstown Arts Centre, and thank you Vandana and of course Auntie Lynn for the special welcome to where we are today and to this event, Arboreal Narratives. And I don't need to add to any of the introductions because you're going to hear from our wonderful panel. And at the end of the day, I think the thing to remember is everything that will come from each of our panellists is about being connected. As Auntie said, we are part of, we're not separate from. We are the land and the land is us, and trees are the static, trees are the constant, and we all have a story. At the moment there's the catalyst, what's Australia's favourite tree, and I mean this draws up this wonderful everyday connection. Like when people suddenly say, oh, well, what is your favourite tree? And then how do you isolate that? We isolate that because of our experiences as children, our experiences in life, where we live, what trees mean to us. It's National Science Week this week, and of course there's so much going on around trees. Next week is the National Land Care Conference, which brings together people who are working with trees every single day. Not just working with trees, but working with ecologies, which trees are the backbone. Everything connects to the ocean. That common humanity, that from Uncle being, whether you're freshwater or whether you're saltwater or whether you're mountain, it's all connected. I was fortunate enough to be at an event at the library this week, which was the launch of a book on gliders, but gliders are only there because of the trees. And then the more we connect and understand to the gliders, then that brings people to the trees, and then they'll protect the trees. So this is, I think today, and Arboreal Narratives is all about stories that connect us. And then the more we build that emotion that Vandana was talking about, which is what the Arts Centre is all about. We have enough science, but what we need is that evocative, emotional connection that we do feel as children, but then we get lost in all of the science. We need the science of Sebastian, which he'll talk about today, because they're the facts that we have to use to break through the day-to-day issues and the structures and the political hierarchy. But what we need more of is heart, and that's what we're going to hear from today. I mean, a veneration society, that's honour. Like honouring, I want to be a part of I want to be a venerator. You know, I mean, we can all be venerators and generators of tree connection, because then that is exactly what I know Uncle Dean Kelly is going to talk to us about, which is this connection to country and connection to culture and the importance of that Indigenous knowledge, the storytelling and that science, which is what it is. So, Uncle Dean, over to you. Big welcome. It's wonderful to have you here on the panel. And trees and your world, tell us about it.
Yuan Wilbanja Duriga Garanji Wawanyampa. The rock is my mother, the tree is my brother, the water is the blood in my veins. I am country, but so are you. I want to acknowledge my old teacher, who in my opinion was a scientist of nature. His mind was so open and his spirit was so alive that he could see and feel what others couldn't. He's seen a big picture, and I was lucky that he filled my cup up with that picture, that knowledge, that culture. His name is Jayala Dalamunmun, and he's passed now. But his knowledge, his spirit is in me. And one of his biggest sayings was, I've got to give it away to keep it. That's why I'm here. I don't own anything. I'm just a living spirit. I'm a conduit to pass stuff on. The tree is very important to all of our existence. I just made a phone call with these clapsticks, but really mobile phones. These are the oldest mobile phones in the world. I call them my Aboriginal my phones, 10,000s. They're so smart, I don't need to plug it into the wall. Telstra and Optus don't own them. All I need to do to use these old mobile phones is hold respect. They'll do the rest. But they're not just pieces of wood that come off a tree that was 500 years old. They can tell us a lot about energy, people, And my old teacher used to say, they're the X-ray machine, they're the ultrasound. When you go into areas and you start to feel what's there, these fellas will tell you if there's any issues, any problems. So I got taught a lot about feeling. I've got a picture up there. I could talk about that picture all day, but I still don't know everything, and I'll never know everything. I'm learning off my little grandson who's 2 years of age and my other grandson who's 18 months. And I'm learning from my father who passed away yesterday, 86 and 9 days. 9 days is very important to me and my culture. 9 days is 9 sunrises. And it takes 9 months to bring me into the world and every one of yous through a woman. So the first thing I had to learn about was 9 months. I had to learn about the respect for woman. Then I had to learn about respecting myself. And then all the other living things around me. The tree and the rock were the two gifts that were given to the old people, not 60,000 years ago. And I don't like to criticise anything or anyone, but 60,000 years is a scientific thing. My old people, my old teacher said we were here since first sunrise. We were here when creation was created. And what they said to me, nature was created first. Then the first human being was created. That first human being was Nyadi, first woman. Then Tunku, the man, was created second. They were given two gifts, the rock and the tree. And they learned to live with the rock and the tree for thousands and thousands of years. Everything in this room, that little wooden desk, comes from the tree. That steel that supports you on them chairs comes from the rock. And us as humans are so destructive to the rock and the tree. We don't understand that they're keeping us alive. We learn in about second class about the tree giving us oxygen so we can breathe. Yet we can come along as human beings with a big chainsaw and cut that tree down with no regard for the life or the memory that we're taking away. But even if that happens to a big old tree, the tree is not dead in my culture, in my teaching. And the easiest way you'll understand that, because a lot of people will see the leaves go, and then they'll start to see the little branches and that go, and the big stump will eventually go over a long period of time. And where does it go? It goes back to the mother. But somewhere in between that, going back to the mother, where it came from, the land, we can get that bit of wood and we make a fire and we can warm ourselves from that fire and we can sit there and get our sanity. That fire is the first television screen ever. But where does it come from? It comes from grandfather's sun in the sky. No grandfather's sun, no fire. We can cook our food, we can make our tools, we can make our medicines. Trees are so important. They're like us. They're so much like us. Their feet are in the ground, their roots. Their trunk is their body. Their branches are their arms. And their leaves are their fingers. And they're catching the same things as us. Water and sunlight. They're your basic things. So we've got to start to look at these trees a little bit more closely and start to understand how important they are to us and our survival. I was taught to leave tracks that other people can see but not follow. and make their own tracks. But I was also taught about the old tree and the young tree. And I was told that the old tree never stops the young tree from growing. It guides, shelters, nurtures, and then one day the old tree will go and fall back to the mother and start to recycle itself, and then the young tree will grow. That's what my old teacher did to me. He was the old tree, that big hard drive, plenty of information, plenty of data, plenty of spirit. Now it's my time to grow and share what he shared, share to the world. But I have to be careful of my ego. I have to be humble. I have to suffer humility to do this and to do it properly. I have to stay grounded. I can't fly with the birds. I can't talk to the old people. Yet they're present all around me all the time. They communicate in different ways, and they teach us about the greatest teacher of all, nature. Nature's the greatest teacher of all, biggest classroom, largest university. And all you have to do to learn from it is not get your plastic card out of your pocket and go to the Commonwealth Bank or Westpac and buy some knowledge. Open your eyes, open your ears, close your mouth, let your spirit talk. And what we do then, we start to see the language without voice, the text in the land, the writing in the land. Watch the land talk to you without a voice. And then you'll start to learn. We are nature, but I'll contradict that. Nature's far more intelligent than any human will ever be. We can learn from the little ant that does so much for the tree. We can learn so much from that little ant and how it's connected to that enormous creature in the ocean, in Garu, the whale. What the ant does on the land helps that whale survive way out there in the ocean. We are nature. We are so connected, but so disconnected and so convenient. They talk about threatened species. These little animals that are threatened. They're threatened because of humans. I wouldn't worry about the little animals. I wouldn't worry about the koalas or the other little threatened species. I'd be worried about us and what we're doing to each other, how we're destroying each other. And I'll finish on this. You will not, you never will, be able to go to the key card and buy $100 worth of life once it's gone. Think about my father passed yesterday. If that old man never taught me what he taught me, and my old teacher, I wouldn't be here doing what I'm doing today. They would want me to do this. They're here with me. They're right here on each shoulder. I can feel them. And they do that because I hold respect. So look, I thank you all for this opportunity. If you want to come and walk on country and learn how to look at this stuff, how to feel it, how to understand it, I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to live till I'm 100 years of age. And I'm going to do that one day at a time. Not worried about yesterday. Not worried about tomorrow. I'm worried about what's happening now. So look at that picture and let it teach you about your relationships, about your connection, your support, your respect, and all the in-betweens. Thank you. In my language, Nachitang Nunga is through the Mother Earth.
I think we need a second. Uncle, thank you for setting the scene for this conversation. I really love the way that you create those very comfortable and easy to associate connections. I mean, the clapsticks as your my phones. That's a language, that's a relationship, that's making a connection to people in the language of today. The fire as the television screen, the trunk as body, the branches as arms. It's exactly really what I think the Arts Centre wanted out of this conversation was those connections. Arboreal Narratives is about everything you just spoke about. It's the conversation, but there's no conversation if there's not that understanding and that thread to bring us eye to eye. And wow, there were so many things, but I don't need to paraphrase everything that you just said. I just need to gather my thoughts before I introduce our next speaker. Yeah, so from Uncle Dean, we're going to move over his left shoulder to Louise Fowler-Smith. As Vandana said, she's an eco-artist and writer, and she's a venerator, an honourer of trees. Speak to us about your connection with trees, Louise, and that rhymes.
Okay. All right. Can you hear me? Oh, good. I actually, thank you so much, Uncle Dean. That was just beautiful, really touched me. I wanted to actually talk about how the Tree Veneration Society was born. I founded it back in 2010, so I was going to just give you a little bit of a story about that. So I wanted to start by saying, of course, that we know that trees are absolutely essential to life, to our lives. Without them, we would die. And yet, deforestation is still occurring all around the world at a really worrying rate. And also, individuals are still chopping trees without compunction. And so, how do we change this? How do we help people to understand how important trees are to us, old trees? What I'd like to talk about is perception. I'm an artist, and obviously perception is important to me. So I'm interested in the role that perception plays in how we respond to things, and in this instance to trees. Obviously, how we actually perceive something, in this case the land, directly influences how we respond to the land and how we live on it. If we see the land as separate to ourselves, we're less likely to respect it or honour it. So to give an example of this story, I wanted to talk a little bit about something that happened to me when I was young person. I was with my father on a dairy farm with a farmer, and the farmer, we were walking through his fields that were virtually treeless, and he pointed to a little patch of trees in the distance and said, "I've got to get rid of that vermin." And I was quite shocked, thinking that there were field rats around, so I asked him where these field rats were, and he said he was actually talking about the trees. He actually saw them as pests. He perceived them as pests and invasive, and he wanted to get rid of them. Next slide, thanks. So, many years later, I actually made my first research field trip to India, of all places, because I discovered that in India there is a history that dates back to the beginning of time of sacred trees and of sacred tree groves. So I witnessed trees in India that had been adorned and subsequently adored. These trees were believed to either house a sacred deity, or they were believed to be like a temple, so a sacred site. They were seen not as mundane, but as sacred in their own right. So, most importantly, these trees, I discovered over a long period of time, were always protected. No one would dare cut down these trees. In a country where there certainly is problems with deforestation like everywhere else in the world, but certainly these trees, no one would touch them. Even if governments wanted a road to be widened, they'd have to reroute the road rather than cut down that particular tree. Next. So I ended up travelling across 17 states of India. I became quite obsessed, actually, over a 10-year period. So right from the very south of India, right to the top, to the north of India, 17 states. I took hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of photographs and recorded oral histories, and I also interviewed anthropologists and botanists in the field about this tradition. And what I discovered was that trees are venerated, or as Costa has pointed out, honoured. I'd prefer to think of them as honoured, for multiple of reasons. And these relate to things like birth, marriage, death, rebirth, health, safety, things like that. And so ultimately these trees, particularly the individual sacred trees, were wish-fulfilling trees, which of course is a tradition that goes beyond India. If you look at cultures all around the world, sort of prior to the advent of Christianity, basically, the trees would be worshipped in a similar way, in Europe even, as wish trees. So now the term for a wish tree in India is kalpa vriksha. So they became kalpa vrikshas. Now, due to time constraints, I thought I'd just show you some examples of these. I mean, as I say, I have hundreds, maybe thousands of photographs. We don't have time, but I thought I'd show you some just so you could get an idea. So this, for example, is like a temple, but it's just trees. There's no building there. And all of the trees are covered in yellow turmeric powder, which we know actually is a natural disinfectant. So they're actually good for the trees. It's amazing. And so women would go to this site to to wish for a suitable husband. And they would not only rub the tree with the yellow turmeric, but then they'd also have turmeric root, which they'd tie to the tree and with their wishes. Next. Here's another example of marriage, and it's also a fertility tree. This one, on the bottom half of the tree are all the yellow cords. They're called tali, they're marriage cords, and with the yellow turmeric. And so all the women have wrapped those around the bottom part of the tree. And then the top part, all those colourful cloths are actually symbols of cots. So that they're the women who have been married, and in the first year of their marriage, they're wishing to become pregnant, to have a baby. And so they're little cots for that wish. Next slide. Now, in India, many temples actually began as a tree. And so this is an example. This is a very important site, a Meenakshi temple in Tamil Nadu. And so what would happen in these instances, if the deity that is believed to live in the tree is considered so important, then a temple would actually be built around the tree. But the tree came first. And so in this instance, the tree becomes the sacred temple tree, or then its name changes to Sthala Vriksha. Vriksha means tree. Next. Now here, because this is an important sacred temple tree, the cot, again, women would go there to wish for a baby. But then in this instance, they'd actually hang these wooden cots. You could actually buy them outside the temple with little dolls in them. So these would be hung, in this instance, because the tree was so important, it would be hung on these structures just around the base of the tree. Hundreds of them. Okay, next. Now, people also make, as I mentioned, people also make wishes at specially chosen trees to achieve good health. And also, in this instance, to wish for a safe journey on what was considered a notoriously dangerous road in Odisha, which is on the west, sort of further north on the west of India. And this began as a tree. People would wish for a safe journey at this tree, and eventually so many people would go there that they built this temple around the tree, and as you can see, the tree actually perforates the roof and the walls of the actual temple. And if you go inside, the actual tree itself is covered in ribbons and bangles and all sorts of amazing things. Next slide. People travel to this particular site. This is a nature temple. So again, no temple, no building, just a tree. Not just a tree, this special tree. And people would go here to get a cure from measles. So you have these all over India. So in this particular one was for measles. And so again, people would go and they would gift bangles and these metal tridents to the goddess who was believed to live here, whose name is Mariamman. Mariamman is a very powerful deity, particularly in southern India. Next slide. And at the base of that tree were lots of sculptures as well. And as you can see, this is actually one of someone who is a representation of someone with measles. So people would know that they would go there if they had measles, they could go there and be cured by Mariamman. Next slide. As mentioned, Mariamman is a very powerful goddess, and particularly in southern India. And sometimes you'd find in different parts of India, if a tree started to have a particular feature or some sort of peculiarity, people would assume that a deity had moved into the tree, had become part of the tree. And so then, of course, the tree becomes a temple. In this instance, the actual tree, you can sort of vaguely see it up high, had started to ooze a white sap. And so they believed that was the milk of Mariamman. And so people would actually go there to, again, make wishes for all sorts of things, often women, mostly women generally. And then you can see it's been dressed, literally dressed, with a silk sari. This is to honour her, it is to, make sure she is honoured, to protect her honour. So people would actually dress the tree to honour the tree. Next slide. Okay, this is an important site in the state of Kerala, which is the west, southwest, and it's called the Parabrahma Nature Temple. Again, no buildings, it's just trees, and in fact it's a sacred grove. The sacred groves are so important because none of the trees can be harmed there. It covers 36 acres of land, and this is considered the Indian version of Lourdes in France. So people would travel from all over India for healing to this tree. And those little wooden, wooden things at the bottom that look like boots, they would often be used to sort of circle parts of the body that needed to be healed. But again, it was the trees that were considered sacred. Next. Also in southern India, if you travel around, you'll often see these amazing life-size figures of horses and animals, all sorts of things, always at the base of a tree. And this is actually an ancient tradition, ancient Dravidian tradition, so it predates Hinduism, and the deity is Ayana, and he is considered to be this very important deity who actually protects the villages, the land and the villages and all the surrounding land. But they're always placed, these figures are always placed at the base of the sacred tree. Next. So these sacred tree groves actually exist all over India, and they can vary from 1 square metre to 2 million square metres. So you can imagine, and keeping in mind, these sacred groves have not been touched for maybe thousands of years. They're not allowed to be touched. It's a really ancient Indian conservation tradition, which has been instrumental in protecting some of the ancient forests there. And this particular one in Odisha is a bamboo grove. Next. That's just another example of the same bamboo grove. Next. Now we're in the Himalayas. This is another sacred tree grove, and the Cedrus deodara, or the Himalayan cedar, is considered very sacred in that part of India, in the north of India, and it's referred to as the tree of gods. And so all that iron, basically, if people are wanting to wish for something, they put something made of iron next to the tree, and it's to the deity of the tree, and it's believed that it'll give healing to men and to cattle. Next. I also travelled in central India to an area called Chhattisgarh. The Chhattisgarh is a very, in Chhattisgarh there's a large area called the Bankstown region, which is known as to be a very important, this is a term they use in India, tribal, or Adivasi. I prefer to call these people Adivasi. They're the traditional owners of the land, and they are predominantly animist, so they believe everything on the land is sacred. And of course they have sacred trees, they worship the tree. But you also find in India that a lot of different religious groups don't mind, intermingling with each other. So you can find some trees in Chhattisgarh, for example, that have the Adivasi type of veneration, and along with the Hindu veneration. Okay, next. So, as I've mentioned, sacred tree groves, it's forbidden to remove anything from a sacred tree grove. Even if a tree falls down or a branch falls down, that cannot be removed. It must stay there and rot back into the land. So you can imagine how important that is to these forests, because it retains the nutrients, and then of course home for all sorts of insects, and the life continues. This is actually a sacred grove in Kerala again, and it's 50 acres of forest where all of the trees are considered like the soldiers to the goddess. So basically they're conserving rare, endangered and endemic plant and animal species in these groves. Next. This is my last slide for the Indian, for India. This is actually a sacred banyan tree in Gaya, where after one of your relatives dies, you wait a year and then you travel to this site to offer something called a pind or pand, which is like a funeral cake, to the deity, and that's meant to release your relative from bondage to the earth. And so people also come and actually venerate by tying ribbons and things around the roots of this tree. So, sorry? Okay, well, you want me to wrap up? Yeah, okay. So anyway, as a result of my experience in India, if we could go to the next slide, we'll just go through the final slides quickly. Basically, I started the Tree Veneration Society to try and inspire a re-envisioning of the environment. And anyway, so we began by venerating trees. So we just go through these 3 slides. Next and next. And then, of course, we realised that trees in themselves are beautiful. We don't need to also always decorate them. So we also have done workshops, if we could show the next slide, next 3 slides, where we hold workshops to try and get to know a tree via all the senses, so each of the senses. And of course we hold exhibitions and symposiums like this one. So next slide, and so that's us. And just finally, if you're interested in sacred trees in India, I've written a book, so the last slide. This is being published as we speak. That's it.
Wow. Now, I think there was no denying when I said at the beginning we have 4 incredibly different and captivating takes. Thank you for that, Louise. And, you know, I couldn't help but think about the way that those trees, as you said, they've been adorned and adored. And you looked at, like, the tree as a temple, and they're perfectly respected. And then, you know, more recently, our dollar and value sense sees something like the birthing tree in Victoria just get bulldozed because we want to shorten the driving time from a capital city to the border by 3 minutes. And you just think, you know, the sheer respect of values there to that, where does the value sit there? What's your sort of take on that, Uncle?
It's like, I guess, value. How do we value life, you know? Because the old people, their way of life was being with nature, and there was no separation. So in this country, I get a little bit worried about where we're going with protecting what they call Aboriginal heritage. Because how do you value something that's 8,000 years old? You know, and that's a very young thing in Aboriginal heritage. How do you if you put a monetary value to it, I think you take the value away from it. It's not about money. It's about making sure it lives, it survives, and we look after it and we understand it.
But isn't it interesting that in the slides that you showed, Louise, that they didn't bulldoze the tree to put the temple. They put the temple at the tree, but then that is a physical representation of that value, whereas the cultural heritage here has been tread so lightly, we respect it, we sit with it, but we don't build all this around it. And it's a real contradiction of the two, because then as a consequence that tree gets bulldozed because it's not seen to have the value that all these structures around the tree celebrate and anchor it as a public statement, isn't it?
And the thing is, Costa, just to tidy that up, is people are looking for sacredness. If you ask them people over there, they're feeling sacredness. So you can't see sacredness, you have to live it. And it's about the feeling that goes with it. So they value it because they know the energy that's in them trees. They know what's there and what it does for the people. Trees are us upside down. Well, we're upside down. And you look at the root system on a tree, how do we do our family trees? Like that there. We should be doing it like that there, where we come from, because we come from the mother, like the tree. Yeah, I don't know. I worry about us humans, and we've got to teach our little ones. We've got to teach the little people to be good people and to value this stuff, to value all our cultures, to look after it, because we don't get a second chance. Once this place is gone, Mother, we drink the same water, we breathe the same air, we walk the same land. There's only one world that humans can live in. Once it's gone, we're gone.
Trees are us upside down. I think if we just take that away from today, that's an incredible thought to build on. And as an artist, I think that's a perfect way to introduce Miley. And you see the world differently. You look at the world upside down, sideways, back to front, front to back. Tell us about how you see trees and their role.
Well, as an artist, I was for many years, probably since when I first have my solo show in Darwin, back in Darwin, I was dealing with kind of racism. I was looking at everybody, the differences and similarity. So I use a lot of symbols, and like Pfautsch. Symbols like a skeleton inside everybody's bodies, and then I will also use outside, which is the skin color, the 4 different basic skin colors. So back and forward in my work. But one thing, I also use the seed that grow. I was experiment, same bunch of seed, put in the different pots of soils. They ended up growing differently. Like the different condition of soil, of course, the same seed, they ended up growing, we can't expect them to grow the same because they're growing different. So I do some growing in my artwork. Oh, okay, so can you fast forward, just keep flipping, ticking, press. Well, this is, I was born in Vietnam, growing up in Central Highland, that's yellow. And in Vietnamese, the Central Highlanders are a bit different from the normal Vietnamese we call Kinh people. Central Highland, they live with nature. They respect nature, similar to what Louise slideshow. Trees are there, living their life, and they worship trees. And if they go to the forest to cut the tree down, they would do a ceremony. They dance, they gong, and they say thanks, and the whole village would go to the forest, chop the tree down, and very carefully, just use a very basic knife, not the big saw, basic knife, cut it very carefully with their little tools, very respectfully, and they build a house only when they need to. Unfortunately, because of Vietnam being controlled from say French colonials, lots of trees that goes build all these beautiful buildings from the forest. When I was in Vietnam, I was living right next to plantations. So 4 seasons, since I was a child growing until the day I left, I could see this 4 seasons, beautiful, from spring, summer, autumn, winter. It's like a song. You can see the different sound. The different weather, different season. You can the breeze breathe through, create different sound. And as the autumn, the sound just follow this leaf falling down. The color changed, beautiful, and the sound different again. So a lot of Highlanders, their songs and their music, they do a lot of music. The song is about nature, about trees, about how they love the trees. And one of the type of the trees called Guinea tree, and it's produced this wild cotton falling down like feather, like little fairy flying around, and women and children will come and pick those cotton, and they make this thread, and they weave, and that weave is the love. They give that love to the whole village, keep them warm and keep them. It was also marriage, exchange. This is okay, because they get men to the village, so women will weave that weaving and they give to the man's family. Okay, man, you can come to our place, be part of our family. You can help her to farm and doing all those sorts of things. So I'll just start with this one. This is in Government House. Although my work is about human conditions and environment and that kind of things about people have to deal with, have to live with, I use a lot of symbols. And a lot of time I also go back to my heritage, do a bit of something that connections, the connection between Vietnamese and Australian as where I'm living now. So this is called Nón Lá. Nón Lá means the conical hat in Vietnamese, made out of nature leaf, and standing on the bamboo tripods. So it's like, to me, it's like a human. When I was setting this up, that week it was really bad weather, the wind just blowing crazy. And that time my partner passed away, had a heart attack, and I couldn't come back to visit this installation. I thought maybe it's all gone, maybe the wind blew it all away. But when I came back, I went back there, they're all there. They're all there. It's like people, we stand strong, doesn't matter how bad our life we can have to deal with. Recently, I was stuck in Lismore. Of course, Lismore before many hundred years ago was trees, forests, right? And all this forest gone, and this is what happened to them, flood, and flood again and again, because the trees is gone. So next slide, please. Okay, this is, I'd like to talk about the Central Highlands because that's trees is a big issue at the moment. So you see the one on the left is the wood tree, they're living with the bamboo, they thread bamboo, made by bamboo and trees. You see those two little on the stairs is the woman's breath. When you enter to the family, you enter the mother's arms, house. So, so on the right-hand side is a natural, very community. They live community-based, gathering in the late afternoon, getting water and putting the gourd, dry gourd, and then carry them in that weaved bamboo basket and take them home. So next slide, please. Okay, and very community works come together, building house, doing things together with bamboos and other nature's materials. Next. And cooking together and share a meal together. Next, please. Yeah, next. Music is part of their lives. I couldn't talk until I was 8, but I could sing. I could sing when I don't know how old I was, but I could sing. So this is the influence, the music influence is, I was lucky to have that, growing up with it. The light in this photo was the light in my camera. That's the only light. And I went back the days dancing through the night and then to the morning. Next slide, please. That's the dawn. They're still dancing, they're still playing gongs because they just want to celebrate. This is before the harvest. They want to thank to the forest and thanks to the seasons, and they get together and collect their hard work, the result of their hard work, the harvest. Next, thanks. You see the man over there blowing music with the horns, and other people doing some humming. And these Central Highlanders been through a lot of hard time from French and then from wartime, the American War, and then dealing with commoners. My town is called Bumatuk. That's the first town in 1975 was taken. I'll call it taken, before the fall of Saigon. Just suddenly overnight, the bomb didn't stop. It feel like it was New Year. Before that was New Year's time, I was a little girl. I thought, how come this year the firecracker never stopped? But before, because there was a gun and bombs. And I often climb up to the top of the roof, singing. I could hear the bomb and gun sound from distance. It was just very, normal kind of lives. We could hear that all the time, every day. So these people have to deal with a lot of that. They've have to work with every different government. It depends on where they live. They have to adjust politically as well as different situation. In the meantime, watching their forest, the tree got cut down, they're losing their home. They have to move to different places to live because without forest, without tree, they cannot survive. They have to move. Next, please. This is one of the weaving scene out of that white cotton flowers. Next. I went back to Vietnam in 2007 as part of the Asia Link residency, and I relearned how to weave, and I got some of my weaving work in one of the exhibition. Next, please. And I cast the Central Highlands face, the mask, and I brought it back here to tell a little bit of story about them. That's my dear people. Next slide. And that's one of the video installation with the weaving installations. Thank you. That also part of the video installations. It's called Land Lost, Love and Living. It's about the Central Highlanders, how they live and how they lost their land and how they keep the music alive, keep the music going, and new lives coming, new generation continue on. Next, please. This is part of the joy that I went to Vietnam and I hear the music again. It's ongoing. Thank goodness the gong culture was part of the UNESCO in heritage culture, so they've been still able to do their music playing the gongs. Okay, continue, please. Thank you. So this work is this year's work, current work, very new work. That, as you see, the previous work was the gong. The bamboo musical instrument that play like this, dung 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 dung, like that, yeah. And sometimes play with one person as a solo. But normally their music is played by community. One person is responsible with one note. The whole song play with different people, but one person play one note. So if I say ding, Wei will say ding, 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 boom, boom, ding, ding, ding. You know what I mean? Yeah. So you just have to really listen to each other. It's sort of like a musical communication, conversations. So in this work, because of COVID, I did that, collaborating with a musician as a circle. And then with this social distancing, everyone only allowed to play 3 notes, have to listen to each other. Otherwise, you got it really wrong. So next, okay, so this is little painting kind of work, but I turned it into video work. It's about forests being destroyed and birds losing their home. So like people, we are like birds. Without the home, without the forest, we lose our home. We have to escape. Next slide. Like a fire. So next slide, please. So you see the white shadow, they are birds flying through the escaping fires. Next. So forest in fire. So it's very devastating that happened in Australia as well, bushfire, and we just cannot say enough how devastating that is. Okay, next slide. I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Miley. I think you can start to see, even though we've got we've had three really different angles coming from our three speakers, you can see from Uncle to Louise that there's the ceremony and the connection and, you know, the value of totem and passing on that knowledge in Indigenous culture to then the adorned and the adored and the wish-filled trees, the respect that you spoke of, Louise, and now, Miley, it was a question of ritual, you know, the rituals involved with what you were talking about. And I think it's a nice way to head over to Sebastian, because here we are in contemporary times trying to work out, well, how do we put value on trees? And Sebastian's work is sort of coming from a place where there's extremes, that people are suffering, and we have to try and tell that story to get them to understand and love trees more. So, Sebastian, take it away and continue the story for us.
Thanks, Costa. And contrary to what Uncle has said before, we are very much trying to put dollar value on trees, because in this world, it may only be the last chance to save a lot of trees from destruction. And I'm particularly working in Western Sydney. I work in suburbs, in the hard-built landscape, so not so much in the Blue Mountains or any of our beautiful world heritage we have right at our doorstep, but really trying to increase, or at least stabilize, if we can't really increase it anymore because of the value of land, but stabilize our tree canopy cover throughout the city. I've got very few slides. You may hopefully like them. I thought I'll look at different scales. So we have heard about art and worshipping trees. I work every day with trees, around trees. They're part of my life. And I look at different scales when I work at trees or with trees. And this is a microscopic slide. This is wood. And we're looking at that's a 400 times magnified wood of the stem. And these little yellow dots, I colored them to make them stand out. So normally this would be a black and white image from a scanning electron microscope. What you see is the starch granules that are stored in wood. It's the food that trees use to grow. When they have plenty of food, they can store some away. For example, when you think of deciduous trees, they store their food in the previous year to then have enough energy and carbon to build the next flush of leaves in spring. So that's where that energy comes from. It's stored starch granules in eucalyptus wood. Next slide, please. Now, I consider this also a piece of art, but I didn't create that. That was nature. This is a microscopic image. It's about a magnification of 20 times. So we're zooming out. We're looking at the wood structure from a little bit further away. And what you see is basically a cross-section through a stem, but of course a very, very tiny bit of it. And these large cells that you can see would normally be the cells where the water flows from the roots to the leaves and then is transpired. Now, this is a slide of, again, a eucalyptus tree, where we know that you have active wood, sapwood, where on the outside of the tree you transport water. As the tree grows and expands its diameter and its stem getting wider and wider, there's a zone where this activity, this transition zone, where this activity starts to cease and you become hardwood. So you have your sapwood, where you have lots of activity and water transport, nutrient transport, signals are transported, but then you have hardwood. This is what we mostly use for construction and so on. The hardwood has no more water transport, and you can see what happens to these water transporting cells where structures start to form that clog up like a plug, clog up these water transporting cells. So it's really, for us, from a scientific perspective, understanding what it takes to transition from one type of wood into a different type of wood within the same tree. just over time. And it's called tylosis. So these little things that you see there, like a net structure in those cells, that's what's called tylosis, and it is irreversible. Once it's there, that's it. You become hardwood. Next slide, please. Zooming out a little bit further, again, I think this could be someone's painting, but it's not. It's just looking at Banksia wood. This is Banksia. This is what we have around us when we start looking at it differently, using different instruments. So it's just a piece of polished wood where I zoomed in with my microscope and took this image. You can see it's really like sun rays coming out of the central cylinder that you see at the top right. And then these rays are basically transport routes for various types of nutrients and food, again, that the Banksia can actually transport radially in the stem. Next slide, please. Zooming out further, this is a eucalyptus leaf. This is what you see in bajillions of leaves out there. It's around us. It's just, again, a matter of looking at nature in a different way, not just with our perception, but using instruments to reveal structures. What you're seeing here in the center, or slightly off to the left, is an oil gland. We all know eucalyptus oil. It's got to be stored somewhere in the leaf. That's where it's stored. And then you see those little roundish cells. They look a little bit blue. And you can see that they're basically two halves, and the middle is kind of open. And this is stomata. That's where the tree takes up its food. So carbon dioxide is entering these little pores and is then photosynthesized, so biochemical processes transform it into starch that becomes the food for the tree that I showed in the first slide. So these are the actual gateways where gas leaves the tree in forms of water vapor and oxygen, and it's taking up the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Next slide, please. Now, of course, trees also, when we zoom further out, they give us a lot of beauty. And that is something that I think is very much undervalued. This is a tree in my backyard. It is not a native. It's still very beautiful, and it has lots of functions. Lots of king parrots eat the little buds that this tree produces right now. So we also look into this debate about native and exotics, and is any plant really a pest? Should we approach that differently because we're living in cities where we already have transformed the landscape so much? Are we really having this debate for a certain reason that is just ideology? Or can we look into the functionality of tree canopy that we really need in our cities for biodiversity, in my respects, for cooling, for habitat, for just beauty? Because it's just nice. It adds in autumn, in this instance in autumn, it just adds color to our lives. Next slide, please. So I'm zooming out further and further. This is an exotic, but look at this image. I mean, it's just fascinating. This is a tree on my university campus at Parramatta South, where I have my office. Jacaranda doesn't come from Australia, but it is a huge feature, and people actually come to see these trees in all of Sydney from all over the world to come here for the blooming of the jacaranda trees. There are whole tourist tours that you can do in the harbour just to look at our beautiful trees. So I think, coming back to the valuing, of course, when you then suddenly start to generate income from running tours with tourists that come here to look at trees, this is where we have economic value that we produce. So we shouldn't forget that there is this value coming with beautiful trees. The best example, I think, is also around the Botanic Gardens and the Opera House. Huge old fig trees. People come there to really enjoy seeing these trees, and we don't have too many of them, unfortunately, left in Sydney. Next slide, please. This is the reality. That was this week when I was walking from my campus to the city campus. It's in Parramatta where they built the new light rail, and they have planted deciduous trees. And I think someone just thought this tree is dead anyway because it didn't have leaves. So there's a real education issue here. The amazing thing that I thought is that whatever that person did to that tree, he laid it down like a dead body. It was not, sprawling and put somewhere else. It was just lying there. Very sad scene, but that's the reality I'm having to deal with. I work in places where the council plants trees in the street to increase the tree canopy, and I work there, and I see people coming and drive their car over these trees, or they even dig them up and put them in their own backyard and make them disappear and call the council and say, hey, council, can you plant another tree? This one has gone. So there are lots of perceptions in the community around trees that we have to change. This should not happen. When it comes to value of trees, and I have lots of examples internationally, there was just last year a very interesting study from the Czech Republic in Prague, where they looked into tree valuation, and they looked into how to value these trees in terms of their value that they provide through shading and cooling, and what it would take to replace that value. And they clearly show that the trees in the first 20 to 30 years cost the city more than they actually generate in terms of benefits for cooling. Once they are 40 plus years, they start to really provide great value. That means if we have that, we never get to 40 years. We never really unfold the capacity for trees to change our microclimates in our cities and help us to mitigate part of global warming that we're experiencing with urban overheating. So that is really something that should just stop. Next slide, please. Because we're doing this. This is where I live in Hornsby. And they planted trees on a playground, and people obviously damaged those trees. We need to stop that, and science has a huge role to play to provide the knowledge that then makes people understand what are these values. There is, as we heard, life and spirit in trees, but there's also knowledge and beauty, and using just images that I showed you, making you understand and see trees, perceive trees differently. I really hope that a conversation about trees is not just about tree hugging. It's often this misconception that we all need to be tree huggers. We don't, but we have to realize how important trees really are to all aspects of life. And that we, particularly in cities, we need to give trees a chance to become older trees, because it's the old trees that provide us with the greatest benefits, particularly for us when we live in cities that get hotter and hotter because of climate change. I leave it at that, Costa.
Thank you.
Thanks, Seb. I think you can see some spectrum here when we go from Uncle to Sebastian and everything in between. And this, you asked the really hard questions there, that it's not just the council's issue, it's the values, and to change the values we need the connection. And I think, and then you talk about the ceremony associated with whether it's the Central Highlands, or whether it's India, or whether it's the little ceremony that took place this morning with the children marching with the bird masks and the banners and marching through a normal Saturday morning here in Bankstown. But I think the thing that struck the most was seeing people's reactions, because we do have our habits, we do have our ways, and we need the change. And something as small as that and getting it into the next generation is critical. But as Sebastian said, he's on the front line every day looking at the consequences of an overheating city, because it's winter now, we're all rugged up and whatever. When we did a story with Sebastian, it was 40 degrees, and we're at a playground where the seat for the children was close to 90 degrees, and the ground was, the softball was 80, 85 degrees, and that's when it's kind of a bit late to be thinking about the ceremony and well, it's not too late, but the opportunity is every day. And I suppose that's the question. Where do we all fit into this picture? And what are you feeling? Are there any questions that you'd like to ask our panel after sort of journeying around the landscape of the tree and how it fits in? We've got a question here.
Just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, before the Arts Centre was used to sit under them every time I come to Bankstown. I always remember that.
Yeah.
You know, and it has value because of that memory. And I wondered if someone could maybe say something about memory that links us to trees.
Can you restate the questions?
Okay. So the question was with regards to memory and what the panel feel about the role of memory in building strength and connection to trees. That shared experience of memory and the tree from childhood and then that carrying on through life.
I'm happy to say something. I think really what all of us, each of us, have been speaking about is perception. And obviously the person who pulled down that poor little tree in the street didn't treasure it, didn't perceive it as something special to be protected. Now, memory, of course, also contributes to our perception. If we have a memory of a particular tree from our childhood, then we're seeing it as something special, as something unique, as something that there's nostalgia there. So we're not wanting to harm that tree because it has that nostalgia. But anyway, that's my take on it.
Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, I growing up with trees right next to where I live. Just see it, breathe with this, hear the seeds knocking down falling seed and the new plant growing at night. And yeah, it's a massive. I couldn't see the end of it. And when I went back to Bumatuk in 2007, they are gone. Gone. And built over this, I call it ugly housing, just and a new street. Oh, yeah. Terrible.
How do you walk that line, Sebastian,
Yeah,
between
happy
your
to.
science eyes and your heart? Because this is really where we're sitting.
I also wanted to mention that, of course, the tree itself has a lot of memory because we can use dendrochronology to actually read time backwards in the tree because the tree stores environmental conditions. For example, and this is just one story, we could talk for weeks, Costa, about trees. I live with them.
Time, eh?
I know. I grew up in Frankfurt, and the Second World War was really affecting Frankfurt. We had a harbor. There's a lot of bombing going on, and I worked as a forest park warden when I did my national service in Germany. That was still compulsory as a male. That was the early 90s when I was living over there. And in that part of the forest where I worked, we had a big wooden tower. And that wooden tower would always be used as a marker for the incoming aircraft to actually target the harbor. So because Frankfurt is in a valley, when you come low with an aeroplane, you wouldn't be able to see into the valley. So they used that tower as their marker to actually get to the River Main and the harbor there because of the industry that was supporting the war from the German side. So the bombers came in, and it often happened that they released the bombs too early. They would fall into the forest and explode, or not, and the shrapnel would embed into the stems. Now, when I was working there as a forest park warden, we sometimes had to fell a tree. These are beech trees, fagus, beech trees, because of the safety for the public. This is a great thing that they had established way before any of the world wars, where Frankfurt had a city forest that was there for the people of the city to enjoy. So it's really close to the city. And that's why these parks are there. Now, when we felled those trees, it was extremely dangerous for the chainsaw operators because they could hit the embedded metal, the shrapnel in the tree. You can't see it. It overgrows, and your saw would jump. And there were in the past people even dying from that. So when we hit metal, we needed to take the saw away and take different tools and manually dissect the tree. And I even extracted metal pieces out of the tree. So there's a lot of memory, not just from humans connected with place, but there's also a lot of memories stored in trees that we can read. We can date trees back 1,000, 2,000 years by radiocarbon analysis and look at the climate that the trees grew under and re-establish timelines of environmental conditions where, of course, no meteorologist recorded anything because we didn't have the instruments, but the trees have that kind of knowledge, and some trees can be like the giant mammoth trees in the US, in California and so on. They can be 7,000 or 8,000 years old. So yeah, there's a lot of memory related, of course, to humans, but also related to the science that you can use to unpack that memory.
Great question, thank you. And thanks for the answers, everyone.
I'm a black fella. My grandfather, he had the luxury of being deported from Nowra to go to Kempsey to go and cut cedar. Now, cedar wood is a big bloody tree, and it's the most crying shame that Australia has ever done it to itself, because where are those trees now? All that cedar up in the rainforest that came from all the way down to what Coffs Harbour, all the way up past Brisbane. Now, all that selection of trees, you know, is almost as big as this room. My grandfather was just one man cutting that down. Because, why? I believe the perception is that us as people are more destructive than what we think. Because in a lot of things, not only things that we utilise in using, make medicine, for example, one of the great cures for malaria came from a bark. So my perception is, are we getting any better, or are we just getting worse?
That's your job every day, and every other person every day, to not make it worse.
But how that can be?
Pardon?
How can that be? And yet things are still getting worse.
Because there are too many forces working on the other side of that spectrum.
There may be too many forces on the other side of the spectrum, but the best part of the story is the matter of knowledge, the matter of education. People,
but you've
got no reflection on these things. Like you showed an example with, breaking a tree yet to grow properly. Just the sheer compulsion of people's destructiveness of nature, of themselves. So it's harder for people to, not only to beautify their cities, not only to take out carbon in the air so that we can oxygenate the environment that we live in, and not only that, but also given homes to various insects and animals and all the, but we as peoples find it's easier to be destructive than being creative. So what I'm saying is that how much can we educate and pass on the knowledge within for us to be more in creativity for all our environments?
Well, look, we've got this whole day dedicated to trees, right? There are hundreds of people here, so I think that's a good start.
Yeah, and I'd add to that and say, everyone here has a chance to take something away, and then look at where you can connect. In Science Week, there's places to go. Next week is National Landcare Week. That is all about trees. The gifts we give. Do we give a gift of a book like this, which can teach, adults and children, not just how to appreciate the gliders, but appreciate their habitat, but draw it so that it embeds in you, which starts to connect to that ceremonial and that adorning and adoring. And when we can get children adoring it because they get it through their entire education stream, and then when us as adults connect to them by giving them gifts, connecting them to the landscape, taking them to places where they can see these trees, going on holidays at places and visiting the forest. Like there's so many opportunities, and it's the little things that add up. It can't be the big things. Like, it's got to be those little repetitious things. And I think when you then see those slides in the context of the spectrum of this conversation, you start to put it into an order where we can value and layer in the values. Because value, the difference between value and values is one letter. It's just one single letter, and we can turn around the value, dollars and cents-wise, that Seb's talking about, by really connecting the heart and those stories that have come from this, well, it's not a side, but those stories that have come through. We need the values to understand the value, and then we need the value to reinforce the values. So I don't think,
Yeah.
you know, you know, I'm sitting in the middle here, and it's like this, and they can't be separated. That's my thought. But yeah, great question. Thank you. I think we've reached 2:30.
Yeah.
I don't know where that went, but somehow it disappeared. Thank you for the questions.
One
Yeah.
Okay.
Bankstown.
Yeah.
I live in East Hills, which is next to Belperra on the Georges River, which is south of here. I think one of the big issues that we face is a lack of value for nature and our political leadership. County Bankstown Council have approved the destruction of thousands of trees along the Georges River, some of which are heritage Aboriginal trees. I spoke to John about that. But also, this is directed at Sebastian. Another big issue for us in Milperra is that we have a 20-hectare University of Western Sydney campus, which the university wants to rezone for housing because they'll make a monster out of it. And subsequently, we're going to lose the centre for education, but also hundreds, if not thousands, of old grey box, Yucas-Ponicana, tree corners, and they've done some dodgy deal with council, and they're putting up a high-rise just over the road here. That's being driven by your university, who are destroying our way of life in our community. It's more of a comment, really.
Just on that, because I was asked about that development, and they reassured me that the patch of Cumberland Plain woodland that is there is protected, and it's not going to be impacted by the...
Trees all over the site. What they're talking about is a small patch on Bullenkall Road, which is a fraction of the site. The university was given that land, 20 hectares. It was public land. They were given that to make university, but they've worked out they can probably make $200–300 million out of it by selling it for housing. So they've conspired with the state government, Walker Corp.
I am aware of the development, and I have tried our Office of Estate and Commercial to rethink the type of development, because I've seen the plans, and in the end they said, that's a great idea, we'll come back to you, and I've never heard from them again. So yes, I am aware of these developments. Thanks for the comment.
There's one more question from a young person here in the audience, Costa. I think we should squeeze
Yay,
that
young
one in.
people, come on.
Thank you. Hello? Well, okay. Yeah, I got my HSC in like 2 months. I want to ask for like help with revision. What's the causes and effects of deforestation on like the environment, biodiversity, human communities? Oh, do I need to say again?
How long do we have to answer that?
Yeah. I think we're going into session 2.
Yes.
That's a good question. It's a big question. Would you want to have 30 seconds each?
Sure.
All right. Who would like to start?
I can start.
Oh.
Yeah, I can start.
What's the impact of deforestation on everything?
Yes. And the simple answer is that it's absolutely destroying the way that our planet actually functions. So it's coming from a purely physical environment, keeping aside now all the emotions and all, things that we attach to trees. the trees are the reason why we have the way of life that we have and the type of animals and plants that live on this planet. They made this atmosphere breathable and therefore created life. If we take that away, life is gone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I've actually read that when they do massive deforestation, for example, in Brazil, in the Amazon, that it actually affects the electromagnetic balance of the planet. That's how important it is, how important trees are. I mean, we need trees to breathe. They are absolutely essential to our life, and so especially deforestation, massive deforestation is devastating to every living form on the planet.
Well, just like we need rain, we need food to grow. Without forests, without trees, just like you live in a cement and a full brick wall, I think. Yeah? So, yeah, it's dry and lifeless.
Can I just add something positive at the end, please?
Yes, sure.
And this is the government, and this is not me speaking for the government, but the government has managed with many millions of dollars to now plant 880,000 trees, new trees, in the last 2.5 years, and by the end of this year they will increase to more than 1 million trees being planted in the Greater Sydney Basin. And I think we shouldn't forget that that is actually happening, because it takes a lot of people to put these plants into the ground and then care for them. So we are building the next generation of canopy. The people are aware of that, and that's land government, councils, state government, Western Sydney Parklands, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of planting going on, which is a great thing to see.
And I think when you mention the word next generation, I think there's an opportunity to approach this from top down and be active. You need to be active at local, state and federal level, make accountability across all levels of government, but at the same time, be active, be an activist, be out there doing things, join your local land care group, be active at your local school and contribute to the school gardens, connect with other groups that are doing crop swap, connect with groups that are repairing and regenerating things such as repair cafes, because it all ties in, because the more things we throw out, the more forests we chop down, the more we reuse, repurpose and refuse, and all of it is tied in, but it comes back to the landscape, and the more we can reconnect and build corridors along our streets, along our waterways, which there'll be more projects coming up later this year with the Arts Centre around the interconnectivity of the Bankstown and the waterways here. The more we cool our cities, the more we hold the water in our cities and develop the sponge concept, that the city is a sponge, but it'll only be a sponge when we don't have more and more hard surfaces or surfaces that have been baked and the water can't go in, because you can start to build soil by composting and separating food waste, which helps build microclimates suitable for growing more trees and building biodiversity by telling stories, drawing, sharing, using technology that you know, and whether it's uncle's clapping stick technology, or whether it's a technology that Seb's using to understand the heat and the heat island and reading the landscape from temperature and cooling the cities. But it's about us doing something and stepping up. And when we step up and turn up and show up and not put up, you know, for too long we've put up with things and just thought that it will be okay. Well, it's not okay. And when we do something as active verbs, as doing people, then others see it, and then we can draw people along. And the more people, if we draw one person along to this event next year, we'll then go from marching on the footpath to marching on the street. And if we bring the schools in, we'll go from marching on the street to shutting down the whole municipality, and then we'll march down the freeway, and it'll just go on. You know? And it has to begin small. This has been a great day. Everything that you brought, you know, you can't underestimate what it means to wear those bird suits and for children to see that and build that value. So, you know, to our panellists who are doing so many different things in different parts, to each and every one of you who are on the front line, who are fighting issues and standing up for our trees. We need everyone doing it. This is not just about who's sitting here and you sitting there. You're more valuable and equally as valuable as anyone sitting on this side. We're just telling some story to evoke action. And the more we evoke action, then the more we can see change intergenerationally for where you'll be in 20 years, and then where you'll be in 40 years, and then 80 years, and the hollows for trees, you know, all those things that come. So Vandana,
thank you.
Do you want to wrap it up?
I just want to say a big thank you to a very amazing and inspirational panel. So thanks once again.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's the continuation of a glorious day. The rain has stopped. If you haven't seen the exhibition, come and have a look. There's beautiful works out there. There's still food. There's still activities for kids. We've got the vegetable plot coming and performing. So it's part of a celebration of what we have in our precinct. Thank you. Thank you.